Welcome to The Switch, not another podcast. The Switch is a collaboration between Baseload Capital and DNB, aiming to accelerate the green transition. We want our podcast to be a central hub for knowledge exchange within the fields of renewables and green transition. Hosted by Kristina Hagström-Ilevska and produced by Emil and Jacob.
Welcome back to The Switch, not another podcast. We are back in the studio today with Jacob and Emil.
Yay.
And we also have an exciting guest coming here today.
We have a really exciting guest. We know who he is, but the listener don't yet.
We can tease them a little bit. He's a climate activist. He's working for a huge company. And I know that you're kind of eager to ask a couple of questions for him. What do you want to know?
Yeah, I was inspired by one of our last guests, Jonathan Maxwell from SDCL. And he said something about carbon neutrality or carbon negative and like stuff around that, how it works, or is it actually, is it possible to be carbon neutral? Yeah, that's my things I want to ask.
Let's make sure to ask him that. Jacob, what do you want to find out today?
Yes, I'm curious about, because the company he's working for, their business is spread out over so many sectors. I would like to get a broad perspective on sustainability. How are we doing with the sustainability work globally or across sectors? Is anything happening, or are we where we were decades ago?
Yeah.
Well, you gave me quite a task, but I'm ready for it. Now you're probably super eager to find out who this is, so take a look.
He is a climate and environmental activist. He is head of sustainability at Schneider Electric Sweden. Schneider Electric is one of the pioneers in sustainability and was even named the world's most sustainable company in 2021. He's truly inspiring and an expert at sustainability and energy management. He will share precious lessons of what businesses can learn from Schneider Electric's sustainable strategy, but also what we can do for a more sustainable world. Let's give a warm Switch welcome to Valentin Montinero.
So, I'm super happy to have you here, Valentin. Welcome to the Switch studio.
Many thanks, Christina, and likewise, I'm super happy to be here, and many thanks for the invitation.
How did you actually become obsessed with sustainability?
Yeah, so I will say it goes back a few years from now, where in 2018, I had a bit of ecological, let's say, awakening.
Yeah.
When I realized that even though after I've been spending quite some years, on the energy field, focusing on energy management, energy transition, energy efficiency, in fact, we were still going in the completely wrong direction, and that the ecological crisis we have in front of us is actually much more than just energy.
What was the actual wake-up call? What was it that sparked you?
It was, I would say, discovering, the impact of what we have on biodiversity, discovering the fact that still today, even if we're talking about energy transition, in fact, there is no such transition happening. So, for the past 40 years, we have been keeping globally an energy mix on 80% of fossil fuels. So, whatever we are saying, we are still, not really improving the situation. And I was like, okay, when we need more disruptive things to happen. And then I started with my own journey, and eventually I was like, okay, next level is to make it more collective. What can I do at work? What can I do in the society more in general?
So what you're saying here is that the last 40 years, politicians, governments, organizations, they have been talking about it, but actually not doing.
Well, it could depend if you look country by country, but when you talk about sustainability or the ecological crisis we have in front of us, for instance, whether you talk about climate change or you talk about biodiversity loss or about whatever other environmental crisis we have in front of us, it's pretty global. So you need to look at it from a systemic perspective because it doesn't matter what one given country is doing. Climate change is a global issue, so what matters is the global picture. And if you look at the global picture, in 1980s, we were roughly at 80% of fossil fuel in the energy mix. If you look the latest figures, still around the 2020s or something, we are still at around 80% of fossil fuel.
You're free to push the button.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
And that was a big driver for me, and I'm still, trying to see how we can challenge that further. Again, starting with myself, because I think it's true in general. Like we have a bit of this thing, even we use sometimes internally, but I think it's not just for Schneider. It all starts with me, right? So people have to start by themselves. What can I do myself? Where I am right now, with my own circle of influence, within my work or whatever, and then how can you expand it further? So I started a personal transition. I became a vegetarian. Then people were asking me around, why do you become a vegetarian? I used to eat meat and whatever before, And then I was trying to answer their question, explaining why I was doing that. Then the more I was doing that, then sometimes I was not able to answer to their question. So I was keeping learning. Like the more you learn about the topic, then you realize how little you know about it actually, which is also interesting.
That's true.
Every day, you discover something new, and not only positive things, I will say. So then you keep, let's say, thinking and trying to find a bit the solution for that until you kind of realize that, okay, it's quite a systemic challenge in front of us. But that's the situation. So
and actually, you've been in the business for 10 years right now in energy management industry. You said that it hasn't changed the last 40 years, but if you look at because you're painting a pretty dark picture, but has there been any changes? Do you see anything in the industry with your 10 years of experience that you have now?
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely, when if we look more locally or in some countries or some applications, companies and so on, there is definitely good things happening. I think it might be something we maybe have time to talk about later, but there is like a big rebound effect, which might be something
A big what?
A rebound effect,
Yeah.
which perhaps we'll need to explain later. But back to your question, I think if I try to think about three maybe big things that has happened not only during the past 10 years, but let's say within this scale where I've been able to observe it, renewable energy has been a big thing. When I started at Schneider, working for Schneider, I was myself working on, for instance, solar farms and with photovoltaic panels and this kind of thing. I even invested myself in this type of field. So that was a big thing, but unfortunately, as much or even more than we have invested in the past years and decades in renewable, we have invested the same or more in fossil fuels. So in fact, when you do 10 of renewable energy, you do at least 10, if not 20 or maybe 50 in fossil fuels. That's why today we still have the same,
energy
ratio, energy
yeah.
mix, exactly. Another one I could say, which is also very close to
one of the biggest changes in the industry then is that we do actually invest in renewable.
Yeah. The thing would be maybe to invest less in fossil fuels and just investing, in addition to fossil fuel, renewable energy, because then we're still having the problem. We're just adding a new component to it.
Can you see any other changes?
Yeah, I think another big one is what we do with digital. So basically, leveraging digital technology. There's also one thing we're contributing at Schneider Electric. So basically leveraging IoT, big data, sensors, connectivity to make IoT-enabled, let's say, energy management system, where we're to automate a building, to manage the energy consumption in whatever industrial processes and this kind of thing. So that has been a change. It's happening slowly but surely, and it's definitely also contributing on the energy efficiency aspect. And I would say a third one, which is even more visible now, especially maybe in our geographies like Sweden, Nordics, and so on, is regarding electrification of different things. Could be in the industry, in the buildings, but especially in transportation. With more electrified vehicles. So this is an extra, let's say, kind of transformation which we see kind of happening now. Then the big question we might ask ourselves is, okay, is it happening fast enough and at the right scale so that we can really mitigate the challenges we have in front of us? And that's still a big question mark, I would say.
Definitely, and moving into that a little bit, if we start talking a little bit about Schneider Electric, I mean, Schneider Electric has been named the most sustainable company in the world. It was 2021, right?
Yeah.
And you have actually now launched a new sustainability strategy. Can you, regarding the Impact 2025 until then, can you tell us a little bit about what you've achieved so far?
Yeah. So maybe just to put a bit in context this most sustainable company thing in 2021. So just to explain, so This is one of the, let's say, award that Schneider as a company has been awarded in 2021, and it's basically so it's something which is done by an external kind of observer of the market, which is assessing, let's say, $8,000 billion companies every year on sustainability criteria, and every year they release a list of the top $100 billion companies in the world, which are, let's say, the most sustainable according to their own, let's say, criteria and so on, which is fairly, let's say, ambitious with a lot of expectations. Schneider has been on the list for about 10, 11 years, I would say, and we were number one in 2021. So just to give an idea, so number one on the list of 100 versus 8,000 plus over billion-dollar companies. So this is obviously something we are quite, let's say, proud of. But I will say at the same time, and it's thanks to all the effort that has been done in the past 15 years by Schneider, putting sustainability on the agenda, like more than 15 years ago when it was not so much of a topic as it is today. So like all the teams and colleagues, like great people we have in Schneider have been working a lot on that, and that's thanks to that we have had this type of recognition. But it's not really an achievement for us. It's more like an encouraging milestone to keep forward. And that's what you are saying. We have now this plan until 2025.
Because that's one of the changes I've seen in the industry going back. I mean, it was not always on the agenda for the big companies. And I think that's pretty amazing with Schneider, because you've had it on the agenda longer than it has been, excuse the word, but a trend.
Exactly.
Because it came a couple of years ago where everybody had a sustainability budget, but you have been working with it for a longer time.
Yes.
Would you say that the company is, could you proudly say that your company is a sustainable company?
Yeah, definitely. And I will say we are a sustainability kind of ambassador in the corporate world. If you look in, I mean, this was one award that we're talking about, but there is like other instance. If you look at the engagement that we have, even our CEO has been a representative and ambassador himself, even in front of the United Nations, kind of a sustainable company representative, so to say. Before the time we define, these sustainable development goals, these 17 goals by 2030 to tackle like a lot of different parameters of sustainability. So yes, we have been a pioneer, I guess we can say, being humbly saying it. I mean, we were not the only one, of course, but we have been one of the pioneers.
If you would say like 2 or 3 things that a company should do in order to become, to look at you and say like, okay, this is what they're doing. Can you give me like 3 things they need to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, on this topic of, let's say, talking about sustainability as a company, I guess the first thing, like for whether you're a company or an individual, actually, it's to understand where you are. So to be able to put in place a kind of strategy and roadmap forward, you need to understand where you are right now. So to do a kind of assessment of the company, what's the current ecological footprint, impact of your operation, your business. So
that means measuring, finding out, analyzing, yeah?
Exactly, kind of measuring is maybe even coming after, but at least understanding where you are and putting in place some kind of strategy and roadmap. Where you are today, where do you want to be in the future? Kind of strategizing, if you will. Then I will say a second step, especially now, we're in 2022, so I mean, we have the power of technology that we can also use to make good things. So I will say it's a lot about what you are saying, measuring, connecting maybe different data points, different streams within your operations so that you have, let's say, good data over time and that you can keep track of your performance. So that's what I will summarize as, digitizing a bit what you're doing, but digitizing not just for the sake of whatever other things you can do for your business, but for the sake of improving on sustainability, energy measurement, or monitoring and management, and all the things that can help you on that. And eventually, like looking concretely at things that you can do to decarbonize. For instance, if we talk about climate change, just to pick one topic, and it could be others, what are the actions you can do to decarbonize? And it might be things about electrification, it might be things about involving renewables, it might be things about switching, I don't know, like the fleet of vehicles you might have, depending on the type of business. I mean, it might be a lot of different things. But this, I would say, is kind of the pathway. Like you strategize, you maybe digitize, or you map all the data that you need to have over time to keep track. Because that's the big thing, today we see a lot of companies having plans, but they are not really executing on these plans. Just a fraction of them are actually really on track with the plans that they have been communicated, just for the ones that have some kind of plan. Because most of companies, they don't have a plan at all. And when they do have a plan, very little companies are actually executing on this plan.
Is that actually greenwashing?
You could, I could say it to some extent. It's a bit of greenwashing, or it's a bit of, people are putting plan in place, which is a good start, but then they need to make sure that this is becoming a priority, high enough on the agenda, so that they're really executing on it. And today, I mean, and I think it's a challenge that every company is having, is that sustainability is okay to have as long as sustainability is aligned with business performance. So as long as it's not jeopardizing, so to say, business performance, if it's not an extra cost, if it's not putting any kind of extra risk on the business, then it's okay to do sustainable things. If let's say you could do things which would be more sustainable, but maybe could put a bigger risk or a bigger cost on the business, but you cannot really create value upon, then it's stop here. And that's where we start needing, let's say, not only movement from companies and corporates, but also to have like regulations and incentives from the government, from like regulators and like the rules of the game, so to say, that needs to be adapted so that companies are encouraged and rewarded to go towards more sustainable practices.
Do you believe that companies should make decisions based on sustainability first and business second?
It all depends which type of let's say, longevity you have in front of you and how far, let's say, you see your business, which is also an issue, by the way, because those days companies are very much driven by more or less short-term ambitions and goals and results and performance to bring. But definitely yes, because over time, it's like the overall investment that we are doing within the company, within the society, and so on. If you're not putting sustainability high enough in the agenda, then we are a bit, let's say, lying to ourselves, feeling that, okay, it will be better anyway by the end of the quarter, by the end of the year, in the couple of coming years, but in the next decade, it might be a completely different picture. So whatever we have built, in terms of wealth, in terms of whatever in the past decades, if it's to lose everything, being a bit dark here, but or to lose a big part of it in just a couple of decades, because we have not been preparing ourselves enough, soon enough, and fast enough now, I don't really see the point, but that's a personal opinion.
I'm going to do the awesome. I think it's really good because you're actually answering the question honestly here. And this is, no, but it's quite, because often when people are like having the company perspective, they always answer that we should, in order, if it doesn't hurt the business. But what you're saying here is like, we have to change it around. We have to think sustainability first.
I will say so, yeah. But unfortunately, I'm not the only one to decide here, and so a big thing to take in. And in fact, what we see as well when you go deeper in this topic is that there is a lot of kind of locks in the system that is preventing such changes to happen, whether at politician level, corporate level, leadership level, and so on. And that's why we are a bit stuck and progressing very slowly in the required transition that we need to do. But yeah.
Then I have to put in the actual the disruptive question already here.
Now it's time for the disruptive questions.
What conversations are needed to be had that are not had yet? What would you say?
Yeah, I guess there is many, but I think a bit of the conversation we are starting to have now. Talking about the elephant in the room, because today, there is very few officials, representatives that are really talking honestly about this. It's a lot about things which are incremental improvements, and sometimes to be proven that it's really improvement. About keeping more or less a business as usual. Talking about green growth, green transition. Somehow it's where there is this kind of general hope that it's still going to be an economical growth of the GDP for the coming decades, whatever we do. So we are going to be both sustainable, increasing the wealth for everyone, everywhere, not changing the model. And it's a bit I don't know, but to me it doesn't really sound realistic. And I think very well a wise man saying once that, it's a bit insanity to think that if you're doing the same thing again and again but expecting a different result, it's a bit and I feel we are a bit in this thing, we are not really talking about, this fact, for instance, I was telling you, when you can check the data, and I encourage everyone that are listening to us to check the data. Don't believe me, check by yourself. 80% of our energy mix is still relying on fossil fuel, globally speaking. It was already the case 40 years ago. So what have we done during 40 years? But another important point as well to realize, and even talking a lot about energy efficiency, which is very important and something we do also at Schneider. So it's definitely important, but it's what we do with energy efficiency. Because in fact, we're also suffering another point, which is the rebound effect I was talking about, which is the fact that somehow every time we have energy efficiency gains in the society, it could be from a machine level, specific process, a light bulb or whatever, to like bigger things, like big industries or whatever. This energy efficiency gain is overcompensated by the fact that then we are using more machines, more light bulbs, more industries, more cars, more laptops, more smartphones, more whatever, because also our demography is increasing. That's also a topic we need to take into consideration. Even though the planet is not changing, so it's the same size, same quantities of resources, same quantities of, so that's a finite thing, but we are in a growing demographic thing. So whatever we gain in terms of energy efficiency, we are losing it with consuming more energy by having more of the things that we were having in the past. And in fact, this is not from me at all, and it's not new fact. It's something that was already theorized in the 19th century, I think it was, maybe to be checked as well, by a British economist that was called Stanley Jevons. And he was already theorizing it at the time where we are using, like steam engine with coal. I think it was like the coal question or something like that. He was calling it in a book. And it was, like we discovered how to improve the steam engine to make it more energy efficient. And at that time, it was a big issue with coal, with mining and so on. So people were like, that's great because the steam engine is becoming more energy efficient. Then it means we will use less coal. And then Stanley Jevons at that time already was saying, well, actually, no, you're wrong. That will be the opposite. Because the steam engine is becoming more energy efficient, then we are going to use more steam engine because it's going to become more affordable to use steam engine in more processes. So the results overall will be that we'll be using more coal because there will be more steam engines to power up, basically. And that's the story for humanity for the past at least 200 years. Our energy consumption keeps increasing over time. So we might be more energy efficient. I guess we are probably every year, like the more energy efficient, let's say, civilization we can be. Like everything around us is becoming more and more efficient, but there is just more and more of everything around us. So overall, our energy consumption is increasing. And back to the point, our energy today is 80% fossil fuel. Fossil fuel is 70% of the causes of greenhouse gases emissions, which is contributing to climate change, plus a lot of other things. And another issue we didn't really tackle yet, and I don't want to be too dark, but anyway, let's face it,
Let's go down into the dark and then we'll get up again.
We'll get up again after. We'll try to at least. But another issue with fossil fuel is not only the fact that it's contributing to, for instance, climate change, is that fossil fuel, by definition, it's a finite stock of fossil. So at some point, we will not have it anymore. So let's say even if we forget for a second that there is a climate change issue, we still have an energy availability issue, and we face it for other reasons right now. I mean, if you look at what's happening in Europe and so on, how do we get gas and oil and all these kind of things. So, like being dependent at 80% to fossil fuel is not only an issue for the sake of sustainability from a climate change perspective, but also for how do we maintain our lifestyle as a civilization, when 80% of our lifestyle is dependent on a finite stock of energy, which is being depleted over time. And knowing that we have already passed some peaks, not going into details, but in the past decades when it comes to conventional oil, for instance. I think it was around 2008 or something.
Do you see a change coming?
Yes and no. I will say it's depending where you look. But the issue is that globally speaking, I don't really see it, at least not at all at the right scale. And I don't see it because I think we are still afraid to put these kind of topics on the table. I'm doing it today, and I'm feeling maybe a bit too free to do it today. Let's see what's happening. I hope next week I'm not calling you back and saying, something strange has happened to me. But I think we need to have this type of discussions because otherwise we are. As long as we are not really facing the problem as it really is, again, there is very little chances that we find the right solutions for it. So, there is definitely things that are happening, but there is also, and maybe then we'll go too deep into things, but even within these transitions, we are doing like counterproductive things, which are a bit stupid, if you ask me. When we talk about electrification, we still want to give ourselves, the luxury of being a bit picky. Okay, what do we do when it comes to electrification? For instance, in some countries there is this debate. Okay, should we use nuclear power or not? Is it 100% renewable? Blah blah blah. I think this is counterproductive, and we are just we maybe don't realize it, but we are losing time by feeling that we still have the luxury to be bit picky like this.
What can other companies learn from Schneider Electric? What would you like them to look at and like, this is it?
I think maybe one thing that's interesting, and maybe coming back to one thing I was mentioning before, it starts by understanding where you are and kind of putting a strategy in place and a roadmap for the coming, let's say, decades. And especially back to when we were talking about climate change, all companies and everyone actually has a role to play. It's like companies that believe, okay, they can escape it, others will do the work and I don't have to care about it. I guess they're lying to themselves. But anyway, so all companies have to put some kind of plan in place. And I think the plan that we have from Schneider Electric, which is publicly available, you can see on our, we call it the carbon pledge, actually, for Schneider Electric between now and 2050, how we are progressively going to transform the company to make it carbon neutral, which is a bit okay, and eventually net zero company, is a quite interesting, I would say, path, which all companies need to understand and to start working on. So that's something which is an enabler for action, I would say, where you start by understanding where are you today. We talk about sometimes, the scope 1, 2, and 3 in terms of carbon emissions. What are your direct emissions? What are your indirect emissions according to your operations? And then to put a plan in place in order to start working on it. And the earlier you do it, the better, because very soon on this journey, you will realize that a big part of your scope and the things you need to work on are not only dependent on yourself and your own operations, but also dependent on your ecosystem of, let's say, partners you're working with, and especially your suppliers, depending on the type of business you're having. So you need to also engage your ecosystem, your suppliers, your partners on this journey. So there is a lot of work to be done. It's quite huge. I could tell you, to put things in perspective, at Schneider Electric, our carbon pledge, it crosses over the next 3 decades. So, until 2050, with a very ambitious, let's say, mid targets, which is important, so that you don't only have like long-term goals, but things happening now. We have a lot as part of our Schneider Sustainability Impact that we were discussing before. But right now, we are at around 65 plus million tons of CO2. And to give you an idea, to put that in perspective, when you talk about 65 million tons of CO2 as a company footprint, if you compare with a country like Sweden, for instance, like the domestic emissions of Sweden, it's around 50 plus million tons of CO2 emission. So just Schneider Electric as a global company,
has
but one
more
company
impact than Sweden.
Has more, let's say, carbon footprint than the emissions of a country like Sweden.
Wow, that really puts things in perspective.
So that just to maybe put a bit things in perspective. One thing we have been able to demonstrate as well doing this work, and that other companies can potentially do as well, is that we do have an impact with our technology. As we are working a lot with energy management, we do have an impact on the emissions of our customers. And we manage on a yearly basis now, with our technology, we assessed it, to actually contribute to reduce the CO2 emissions of our customers by around 80 million tons of CO2 a year. So in fact, already now, we can demonstrate somehow that we are having a positive impact, if you will, of about maybe 15 million tons of CO2 on the overall emissions worldwide, which is also a contributor why we also became one of the most sustainable companies in the world. But here again, to put that in perspective, I feel we need to do it. This 15 million tons of CO2, it's versus, just if we talk about the energy and heat system, like 15,000 million tons of CO2 that we emit every year. So in fact, it's 15 versus 15,000. So, it's like very small versus the size of the problem we have in front of us. And unfortunately, today, emissions are still rising up. So this benefit of 15 million tons we have is even overcompensated by, the global increase we have year over year. So just to say, this is great, I think, what we are doing, and I'm quite proud of what Schneider is already doing that. And we are aware about it at Schneider, we need to do much more. Even that is not enough at all. But this is even things that all companies will need to look at to see, okay, how much we are contributing to that within their own operations. It's
actually an excellent example of the importance that companies, governments, and individuals need to work together, because it's not a one-man show in that sense.
Definitely.
But it's also, and to add to that companies have a big effect. Very good. Yep. Thank you very much. I think we have a question.
We had a guest on the show called Jonathan Maxwell from SDCL, and he talks about this thing about, what do you call it, carbon neutral. Christina, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he said that there is no such thing as carbon neutral because of you take energy out of, produce energy out of the system. You can't put it back in.
Yeah. So
how do you
I think it's a good point, especially on the carbon neutrality thing. And you might have felt that okay, when I mentioned it, I was like a bit because in fact it's true. I mean, if you ask me, and looking at what we can see from a scientific perspective and so on, in fact, carbon neutrality doesn't really make sense when you talk about it company-wise. Because in fact, the carbon neutrality we are aiming for, and when you look at the IPCC report and so on, is kind of a global systemic carbon neutrality, which means that let's say the entire emissions of humankind, if you want, or human societies, is compensated, globally speaking, by all the carbon sinks that we have, natural carbon sinks that we have, worldwide. So that's the kind of neutrality that we want to achieve. But this can only be achieved, let's say, globally speaking. So when you take like a specific company, it doesn't really make sense because then you start, let's say, to take into account, okay, how much my company is contributing, but in terms of neutrality, so like carbon sinks, like how you will absorb or compensate for the CO2, you are starting to engage yourself on assets that you don't really necessarily own or master. And so there is... carbon neutrality is very risky to use, honestly, as a kind of as a silver bullet for a company in terms of carbon strategy or climate strategy. There is one interesting thing with carbon neutrality. So I would agree that it's not the solution at all when you look at it company-wise. It just makes sense from a scientific perspective if you look like for the entire world, which is what we're aiming for with the Paris Agreement, by the way. Not sure we'll reach it, but that's what we're aiming at. And but one thing which is interesting with carbon neutrality is that it starts putting, because we do have milestone as well in Schneider, and the good thing with that is that it starts putting a financial constraint on the, let's say, like the financial situation of the company, on the emissions which is associated to it. So basically you start to put a price and a fee on the CO2 emissions or your CO2 footprint that you have within your company. And then, as soon as you start talking about money and, in a company and it has a financial impact, so then you are not dealing with it just like a sustainability nice thing to have. Okay, now it's part of our cost. So how do we manage this cost? How do we try to, minimize this cost? So then maybe you can work on, how to minimize your emissions. So I would say the benefit of this, which is more or less interesting depending which price we are talking about for carbon neutrality. And that's back to the point where we need, for instance, politicians to maybe help to put some kind of guidelines and rules. Okay, what kind of CO2 offset is accepted or not? Because, you will find CO2 offset at couple of euros and some of them that will be hundreds of euros. So you have like completely different things. And then for companies, they can still say I'm carbon neutral. Doesn't matter if they take the offset at €1 or the one at 100. But maybe there is something that we need to agree upon. But yeah, there is a financial stimulus to work on it as soon as you have it in place, which is good. In your case, to give a concrete example, for instance, in Sweden, managing your own, let's say, local carbon footprint here as well, because we have this milestone of becoming carbon neutral at operational levels on scope 1 and 2 in our country by 2025. It means that by 2025, whatever CO2 emissions or footprint we have left on our scope 1 and 2, we will have to pay for it. And then we included that in the strategy to say, well, instead of paying for CO2 offsets from 2025 and forward, we rather invest that money now in some kind of transition measures to, just remove the emissions. And that's one of the things we do. For instance, it has been a booster to electrify your fleet. For instance, we have a lot of company cars due to the nature of the business we have in Sweden. And we are electrifying it now to, remove these emissions from our...
Because that will come in the end.
That will come, for companies, and I think right now it's a bit of a voluntary thing. That's still the thing. Like there is no regulation that is putting it mandatory. Company have to be carbon neutral by this date or whatever. But companies that want to brand themselves more and more as a sustainable companies, they have to do it. If they want to be serious about it and also be compliant with some initiative, there's different initiatives that requires company to do that anyway. So it's becoming something more and more normal, and we could expect that maybe one day it could become regulated. That companies
hopefully,
have to. have to be carbon neutral in different contexts, and then putting maybe a specific price on that. A bit like we have, I mean, it's different, but there is today, for instance, a price of CO2 for specific industries. You know, like we call it like this emission trading system, which is forcing some companies to pay for CO2 credits, or they can also sell CO2 credits if they're consuming less or emitting less CO2 emissions than the budget they have allocated to them. But I mean, this type of systems is maybe something we could expand further in the society and or in the company world. And yeah, so I mean, it's part of the solution. It can be an extra stimulus, but I agree that it's not enough to say, okay, I'm carbon neutral, because very often we don't know what it means, and it's not really properly regulated, and you have no really control over the offsets you're purchasing. So it's, but it's a big bubble. It's part of this bubble of greenwashing that you can see with like a lot of announcements from a lot of companies, you know, telling you about the one thing they are doing, which is so-called green, but not telling you about the 100 others that they are still doing, which is not so green. So yeah, that's one of the way to.
That is actually a question that I had for you. I mean, you have actually said, quote, that this is a bubble of greenwashing. You just said it. What are the main risks in this situation, and how can we put an end to it?
Yeah, putting an end to it, I think it's. I don't have necessarily all the answer, but I think there is definitely a regulation thing that will potentially need to be put in place, or also there is a social game that can be played, like with shaming or whatever. But somehow, I think one of the consequences of it, unfortunately, is we are losing time. Because the time we are spending now, let's say, putting a lot of things.
And I think that's so bullshit.
It's exactly.
We're just losing time trying to play a game which is not genuine and true. Is just going to take us nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, we're losing time, and it's counterproductive as well, because I mean, this time we are losing. It's also we're also playing with a bit of the general trust of people, citizens, consumers, and so on in like the corporate world. And then if we lose this trust, and if maybe in a couple of years from now, hopefully the sooner the better, we react and we try to change that a little bit and to become more consistent, perhaps. It might be more difficult due to the fact that right now we are bullshitting a bit everyone.
And I also think that we're going to polarize the society, because, as you said, if we don't have the trust from the society, in a sense, we're going to polarize it, and we're going to have a group that says, no, we don't have a problem, and a group that says we have a problem. And there we're going to get stuck. So greenwashing is a huge problem.
I fully agree, and it's unfortunately it's part of what we see. At the same time, it's maybe also kind of a necessary step, a bit as we were talking about this carbon neutrality. Maybe one of the, if we try to look at it from a positive angle, the thing is that, okay, with companies exposing themselves with messages more or less, let's say, credible and so on, somehow they have exposed themselves. So I mean, at some point, they will be, let's say, challenged about the things they have exposed themselves to, and they will have to react one way or another to it. So that can also be maybe a booster eventually of action. But I mean, it will take time. We're losing time. It's going to be a slow process. But yeah, that's
I mean,
what we're in.
To become a bit more personal, I mean, you often say that regardless of the efforts, we're not doing enough.
Yeah.
You're also an activist. How do you deal with these feelings? Working with it on a daily basis, being an activist, taking personal choices, and seeing these walls being risen all the time. How do you deal with this?
Yeah, it's not always easy. I will say it's a bit of a psychological game and thing, but the way I see it and the way I escape to it, and I think it's true for a lot of other activists that I know and that I'm collaborating with, is that being in action, basically. So whether you're at your company or whatever you can do personally, but in your company, being there, trying to influence the things in the way that you feel or making the most sense, maybe being this change maker a bit from the inside, which is needed everywhere. Is actually the thing that's kind of give a bit of energy and motivation and hope. So that this idea that, okay, by being there, you can be part of the solution also there, try to contribute, let's say, within your own cycle to make things accelerate a bit further. As human beings, we are replicating what we see elsewhere. And that's part of our nature. That's how we have, developed over the generations, like we are replicating what we see elsewhere. So if we see more and more people doing things differently, but maybe doing things in a smarter way, so to say, from an ecological perspective, which is becoming a big question, if it's a good thing, why people will not do the same? Like people will start replicating it. And that's also what is giving me hope, and maybe to kind of bring back up, like leaving the dark
we're
side.
Down there now, we're going
exactly.
up again. Yeah.
What's very interesting is that when you realize that, in fact, a big root cause, of all the problems we're having is our human activities. But our human activities, they're driven by what we do as human beings. And there is a, kind of disruptive shifts that we can do as human beings, which can go very fast. For myself, I became vegetarian over the night. At some point I was like, well, I cannot be consistent anymore.
You're traveling to France by train now. You're biking
exactly.
here. All these things.
There is things you can do pretty fast at your own level, which have huge impact if you think about it systemically. And people can do the same very fast as well. And spreading the word across human being is something that can be a positive exponential curve. And that could go much faster, than trying to have transformation maybe coming from the top or things like this. So what I believe in is, let's say, the power of human beings to change fast. And I think the key for that, it's back to one of the topics we discussed, is that people need to really understand the problem and to start really be convinced that, we cannot just go as it is now. We need to have some disruptive change. As long as they don't understand it, they will not do it. And they will not accept it, to do whatever actions even people will be asking them to do. Because if you have not understood the problem, why should you do it? You have a life, maybe you're happy with it, why should you change your life? If you have not understood why you need to change it and how you can contribute to it. So it starts with education. And that's why, back to the point, for instance, tools like the climate fresk and educating our people internally at Schneider, people need to first understand the problem to really then be, working on it, and working on the solutions, will take us whatever time we have in front of us. Because, the size of the problem is so huge that it's not like we can fix it in a couple of initiatives. Otherwise, it will be done already. Yeah. But the more people we have engaged and committed on this, aware about the problem, the more we have people that will think about solutions, and then, collective intelligence is so powerful, and we will be able to...
It's almost like you gave us sunshine now. Because actually that's the reason why we have the switch, not another podcast.
I think it's
we really
initiative.
Want to educate and also in a fun format to entertain people regarding this, because I truly believe that you're right, that it has to do with education and raising their awareness. So I grabbed that. Did you see that?
Yeah.
And now you have the chance to give a sunshine as well. So if you would give sunshine to an organization or individual or maybe a company, who would you actually like to give sunshine to?
Sunshine.
There is an initiative which has also good content in English, which is called the Shift Project.
The Shift Project.
Exactly. So the Shift Project, and the leaders among the initiative, people like Jean-Marc Jancovici, the French kind of opinion leader, very vocal about sustainability and energy questions. I will encourage people to check that. So that will be my sunshine for the Shift Project and Jean-Marc Jancovici. I don't know how much we should explain what they're doing, but that's my sunshine. And basically, we are working on the transition of our society to decarbonize it in front of the challenge we have, taking both the parameters of climate change and the fossil fuel dependency that we have today. So the double kind of constraint, which is climate change on one side, but also the fact that fossil fuel is not forever. So how do we prepare ourselves for the future?
Good thing. We will definitely send the link as well so that people can check it out.
Sure.
On the theme that to educate yourself, definitely a very good thing. Well, we're coming to an end over here. So I wanted to ask you in that sense, we've been discussing so many things. I bring with me the start at execute. I think that was excellent, and also the education part. But what would you like to summarize today's conversation with?
Yeah, as we were discussing just a couple of minutes ago, I think, or maybe if we need to leave one takeaway for people, is that it starts by understanding the problem. So if there is one, not even an action, but an advice for people, is get yourself informed. The switch is a lot about that, and it's a great initiative for that, to get people informed about about the situation we're facing, and that's how it all starts. So it started like that for me. I started to be informed in one way or another, and then it changed my life basically. So, but it starts by this, and that's the only way that you can make it effective, because then it will come from you. So get yourself informed on this type of topics. Check whatever things we have been discussing about today. Don't believe me just because I said so. You don't have to trust me, and you don't know me. So, but check it. Be informed. Continue to dig, and it will trigger quite positive change in your life. You will see.
Well, I trust you. You have convinced me, and I was convinced even before. I would like to really thank you very much for being here, for explaining, and for giving us a good example to live up to. I think it's important that you not only work on it, but also live it. I think that you said it very good. So I'm happy to have you here, and hope that we will continue to have cooperation and collaboration, because you're a great role model there. So check out his LinkedIn profile, and you will get a lot of inspiration, I know. If you liked what you saw today, make sure to subscribe, to share this episode to anyone that you think can get inspired. Will you share it?
I will, definitely.
Oh, good. So that we can make sure that as many as possible get to know and get to be a part of the switch. It's up to you, it's up to me, and we can do it together. That's what we learned today, right?
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much, Christina. It was my pleasure really to be here. So it's a great setup. Thank you.
Thank you.